Welcome back, you guys.
Glad to be back.
Oh, good. Glad you're glad to be here. This would be a very different show if you weren't, huh?
It would. It would be you and Jill, probably.
Or something. We're all back. Welcome, and etc. Sci-fi and fantasy read-along. All that good stuff. We're here today to talk about chapter 8. Good Lord. This was a normal chapter, normal length and all that good stuff. Did you guys have any problems? Did you have to look anything up? Did you do any extracurricular work for this episode?
You can't say that I really did, other than keep reading it a bunch of times.
Well, you got that song for us.
Yeah, there was the Feb quartet or barbershop quartet, optometrist, whatever. Yeah, and that was apparently that's a real song. So thank you for bringing that to us.
Well, I just looked in the beginning of the book.
Oh, gives credit to the song.
Yeah, although there were other songs that were real that weren't given credit.
I wonder if they were in the public domain or something.
Probably something like
he didn't
that.
have to.
Although this one, the recording I shared with you was from like 1928.
Yeah.
Yeah, right there. 11 Cent Cotton by Bob Miller and Emma Dermer.
That's what we heard.
1928,
Wow.
1929.
I did look one thing up, and it had to do with the wife of what's his name? Howard W. Campbell Jr.
I looked her up too.
I looked his wife up and found that she... Is there... how is her name spelled? Her last name spelled in y'all's book? Is it North or Noth?
I don't remember. I did take notes on it. What page was that? Oh, we have different books, don't we?
Yeah.
I looked her up too because sometimes I don't know if it's a real person or not a real person. So
Yep.
I looked it up, and apparently it's not a real person. But there's
It says North. Resi
Okay.
North.
Resi Noth is Howard W. Campbell Jr.'s wife in the book Mother Night. Which, well, whatever. I mean, I didn't know that. I didn't... Also, guess who's in that book? O'Hare.
no way.
Which leads me to wonder if O'Hare... if O'Hare isn't a little closer to the author than Billy Pilgrim.
Is O'Hare a real person?
I have no idea, man. The names were changed, remember?
Well, that's what he said.
I don't know. How do you answer that? Anyway, so again, we're here to talk about Chapter 8 today. You guys ready to get going?
Oh, I'm ready.
Oh, what does that mean?
It means that I better do it now or else I'm going to be falling asleep soon.
Oh. All right. Quick note. An $800 star sapphire ring in today's money is $7,300.
Oh.
So it's still pretty pricey.
He was also an optometrist.
Is it fair trade?
I don't know.
Well, I mean, he had a positive career. He was a partner in the business. He had all these other investments. I mean, as a doctor, $7,300 would be like, I don't know, a nice gift that he could probably afford without too much question.
Well, obviously he could afford it.
Hey, man, some guys are like ridiculous and buying gifts they cannot afford just to impress their ladies.
Fair enough. All right, well, let's get to... Hold on, I'm on the wrong page.
With the first one?
I'm on the wrong page. Like page 1, come on.
All right, so where were we at the end of last chapter?
Phil?
He had just gone to the factory where they made the syrup for pregnant
Oh, yeah,
women.
the lollipops.
Yeah.
He gave a spoon to old Edgar Derby. Poor old Edgar Derby.
And he cried.
Yep, he took a spoonful and it electrified him, and he gave one to Edgar Derby, and Derby cried. That's right, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So then he hid the spoon because somebody was
Yeah,
coming.
I like that scene. That was actually really good.
Yeah, it was nice. All right, so we pick up now. We're in Dresden 2 days before the bombing of Dresden. And we have our American prisoners of war, and they are being wooed by Howard W. Campbell Jr. He's trying to recruit them for a special unit.
That's that American that turned Nazi and wrote all that propaganda for them.
Yes.
About Americans being
schlubs, essentially.
But but let's before we even get started, let's talk about how this guy is dressed.
Yes, please.
He's got cowboy boots on, right?
Well, that's not even the half of it. This is so ridiculous. Campbell was an ordinary-looking man, but he was extravagantly costumed in a uniform of his own design. He wore a white 10-gallon hat and black cowboy boots decorated with swastikas and stars. He was sheathed in a blue body stocking, which had yellow stripes running from his armpits to his ankles. So a onesie, right?
Yeah.
His shoulder patch was a silhouette of Abraham Lincoln's profile on a field of pale green, and he had a broad armband which was red, with a blue swastika in a circle of white. And he goes on to explain all these meanings and what have you, but I can just view this guy. I mean, he looks like a clown, and he's going there before these American POWs and trying to recruit them into fighting the Russians, which kind of makes sense. On some levels, it does make sense. He said, like, you guys are going to be fighting the Russians, you know, whether you like it or not, you might as well start fighting them now.
And I got food for you.
He was trying to bribe them with steak and mashed potatoes and all this stuff, too.
And they are, I mean, outside of the syrup, they literally are starving to death.
They have poor nutrition to the point where they're getting ailments from having vitamin deficiencies.
Yeah, he said there were sores breaking out on their skins. There were sores in their mouth. There were sores in their intestines. Basically, almost all they're eating is syrup.
It's got some vitamins, but it's, you know, they need a lot more than what they're getting.
Pure sugar.
Probably, yeah.
With some vitamins.
A man in that uniform would not be able to convince me to join him in any endeavor at all. Unless it was Halloween and he was like, hey, man, you want to go to a haunted house? I'd be like, yes, absolutely. I do. But not to go fight the Russians.
Yeah, there's no regalness or royalty or...
Don't forget, it's not just a fight against the Russians, it's to join the Nazis to fight the Russians.
Ultimately, yes. And he said
he's calling it an American group, but...
He's like, you're only going to be fighting the Russians, and when we're done here, we could repatriate you back to America through Switzerland. So,
yay.
I mean, he had a good plan, but the guy just looks like a clown. Like, nobody would take this guy seriously.
He designed that outfit. He designed it for himself. All right, so with this wooing, as it were, the headhunting that he was trying to do for that, it was called the Free American Corps. It falls essentially on deaf ears, except for Edgar Derby. Remember, they're all like malnourished and no energy, and they don't feel very good. But we have Edgar Derby's finest moment here.
Poor old Edgar Derby and his finest moment.
He stands up and he tells this man that he's a snake, worse than a snake.
That's not cool to snakes to say that, is what he said.
There was kind of a sneaky little insert in there that I would like to talk to you guys about. Fourth sentence down, I think it says, one of the main effects of war, after all, is that people are discouraged from being characters.
Yeah. It's because he said there's no characters in this book except Derby.
Because war has this way of crushing people. Most of the people are so sick and so much the listless playthings of enormous forces. I'm bringing that up now because when we do our final episode, I'm going to propose something to you, and that to me is evidence of it.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, excellent, right? Excellent. All right, so they have retreated into the meat locker where there are thousands of hooks that are empty, a few that have horses, sheep, and cattle on them, and then, of course, all the POWs are down there with their guards, and Howard W. Campbell Jr.
How would you like to be him as your side's losing and you're stuck down there with all these Americans?
I wouldn't want to be him, period. He's wearing that ridiculous outfit.
I didn't mean it that way, but... I mean,
they're not... I don't know, man. There's 100 of them.
Put yourself in a not Nazi situation, but you're still the bad guy.
Well, he's worse. Like, you know, he's a turncoat.
Turncoat, traitor.
And he's a scoundrel, not just fighting for the other side, but a complete devious, manipulative scoundrel.
Yeah, I don't think it can be the same character, even though it has the same name as Mother Night, because the character there is described as, what was he? He had grown up in Germany from the time that he was pretty young, and he became an American CIA agent, a spy, essentially, for the Americans during that war. And I don't get the feeling that this is actually the same person.
Yeah.
Could
Maybe
be.
the author just kind of had second thoughts about
I think he reuses names and characters and stuff like that is what I think.
Maybe.
I mean, O'Hare's in that book. It didn't sound like the O'Hare that we're dealing with here. He was not, for example, he wasn't a scout.
What about Kilgore
right?
Trout? Is he,
He's in other books. Yeah, he's in other books. He's always a grumpy old turd. All right, so these guys down in the meat locker, they fall asleep, or they go to sleep, and sleep returns Billy Pilgrim to the conversation that he was having with his daughter when she was threatening to put him in a home. And she was like, I don't know what we're going to do with you, Dad. And it turns out that she's really mad. She's displacing her anger, and she wants to kill Kilgore Trout.
Why?
Bad influence.
Wait, her displaced anger is... I think the conversation has got to the point where she's like, you know what I could really do is kill that Kilgore Trout,
Uh-huh.
I don't know if it's I think her anger towards her father is still legit.
It's easier to blame it on some outsider instead of her dad, right?
Sure.
She's like, I sure could kill Kilgore Trout. But yeah, she's furious with her father because her dad is a ding-dong. Doesn't do anything to help himself. Just seems pretty helpless, pretty much. But anyway, all right, so Kilgore Trout is mentioned, and that kind of leads us into this meeting between Kilgore Trout and Billy Pilgrim. And obviously Billy Pilgrim is a huge fan of Kilgore Trout, and they end up meeting in an alleyway. Vonnegut says that he is bribing, cheating, and bullying children, and his job essentially is to make them deliver newspapers.
All right, so one of the things I really like about all of this Kilgore Trout stuff is that when something gets brought up, it's often something that he's already written. Like, oh, and that was a treat. So, case in point, here he is haranguing these kids. And he's like, I tell you what, whoever sells the most and collects the most, they're going to go on a trip with their parents to where?
Martha's Vineyard.
Martha's Vineyard. And then there's this one newspaper boy who's actually a girl, and she's like, she's like really excited. And it sounds like she's industrious enough to probably win this thing. She's like, well, can I take my sister? And Kilgore Trout says, well, no, money's not made, or it doesn't come from trees. And then, of course, there's a story that he wrote where money came from a tree,
It's smart. It's very, very smart.
It did sound smart. It's just probably really poorly written.
I'm sure.
There's no way he's going to follow through with his promise, right?
Oh, no, it's almost certainly it's a bribe that he's not going to follow through with. Yeah.
Scoundrel.
Hey, let's not... I haven't seen anything that would suggest that.
No? Nothing, huh? Okay.
All I know is that he is adamant that the sister ain't going.
So this meeting is going on in an alley, and Billy Pilgrim is trying to drive his Cadillac through the alley, and he sees this old man in a beard. He's like 62 years old or something. He's not that old, but anyway. An old man with a beard talking to all these kids with their bicycles and their newspaper bags, and he can't get through, so he just parks and he watches, and he listens, and he hears that little girl say, Mr. Trout. And he's like, that man looks familiar, but he can't place the face. So have you ever heard of, you guys know who John Steinbeck is, yes?
Yeah, sure.
Are you aware of that book that he wrote, Travels with Charlie? It's a nonfiction book where he got an RV, essentially. It was a pickup truck with a camper on the back. And he took his poodle, Charlie, throughout America. They just drove around together.
Oh.
And he was famous at that time. Famous.
Novelists were famous at one time.
He was super famous, and his picture was on the back of the jackets of all of his books. Like this is after East of Eden. This is after the Grapes of Wrath. This is when he is at the height of his power. He said he was not recognized once.
And people wonder why glasses work for Clark Kent and Superman so well.
No kidding.
Touche.
I mean, all he does is slip and fall one time, and nobody thinks he's Superman.
No, Superman would never slip.
He would never, and he wouldn't wear glasses either.
Of course not. That perfect vision.
That's right.
Laser vision. All right, so the meeting breaks up except for one little boy who basically quits on Kilgore Trout, and he's left with the bag of newspapers that he has to deliver. And Billy Pilgrim is like, oh, well, let's get in my car. Let's go do this together.
Well, Kilgore Trout has no car.
Yeah.
He has no bike.
Yeah. And he's terrified of dogs.
Oh, yeah, and he's terrified of dogs, exactly.
He's like, "Are you Kilgore Trout?" And Trout is so unaccustomed to thinking of himself as an author because he's never made any money that he's like, "Huh?"
I find it's more than that.
There's an author named Kilgore Trout. There is?
He didn't think of himself as a writer for the simple reason that the world had never allowed him to think of himself as one.
There were three things in this whole scene that stuck out with me. One was it said the exact same phrase yet again. Somewhere a big dog barked.
Yeah.
That's been happening multiple times, and I've been thinking about that. And
did it hurt?
No, it didn't hurt. But that exact same phrase over and over again. Do you know how like when you hear something and it immediately reminds you of something that happened years and years and years ago, and every single time you hear that, no matter how much time has passed, it snaps you back to that exact same moment. Do you know what I mean?
Was that for Billy or was that for him? The author had just told us that Kilgore Trout was deathly afraid of dogs.
Yeah, I don't know, but it all started.
And then the dog barks.
It all started back to that German Shepherd named Princess, that
farm
dog, and then it happened at least one other time after that.
There's an element of something like that I think I've noticed also in this chapter that I think may have happened many a time before.
What is it? And if it's in the future, it's fine. Just tell me. We can talk about it later or whatever.
When we mentioned the ring in the pocket.
Oh, good. Do you want to do that now or later?
No. When we get there, it's fine.
Well, I want to go over a couple of things with you. One was about these books that he had written, and
I liked his ideas a lot. But go on.
Well, the first
like
one was the money tree that you mentioned, and I had it in my notes. It's like, is that a metaphor for something? Because what he wrote was there's this tree that, it had $20 bills for leaves. Its flowers were government bonds. Its fruit was diamonds. It attracted human beings who killed each other around the roots and made very good fertilizer.
Well, I mean, the fact that we'll fight over something that we all find to be worth something. So, like, it doesn't necessarily have to be money, but in this situation, it is money.
And a tree figured it out and is using evolution to
It might not be so insidious as being a tree that's going to figure a way to how to water and feed itself by having humans kill themselves at its base. But that would be just as cool a story also.
I think this is a metaphor for the United States of America. The tree is the United States of America. It is blossoming and overflowing with wealth, but it only does so at the expense of others. And the one thing that made me think that was when he said its flowers were government bonds, like they sold in World War II, just to keep the war going. And I think it's portraying the United States government as this overwhelmingly abundant tree that can only exist at the expense of human beings.
Isn't that all governments?
It may be true, but I hope it's not.
What about the other one?
The other one was The Gutless Wonder.
I don't remember what his other book was. There were several that were described back in like chapter 5. Do you remember what those ones were?
Well, let me bring up my spreadsheet of awesomeness.
Yeah, but nothing was better than the one he was making up on the spot.
That's true, but that's in the future
so
too.
He wrote...
Which one was that, Yul?
He wrote the Gospel from Outer Space, which talked about how Christianity was silly. There was The Gutless Wonder. There was Maniacs of the Fourth Dimension, which sounds similar to the Tralfamadorians. And that's it. I got 4 on my list.
Okay. And the one that he makes up at the party is about a robot that has halitosis.
That one's amazing.
Yeah.
That one's amazing.
We got a lot of stuff to talk about at that
That's
party.
like a human nature. Well, see, science fiction has this tendency to criticize human nature or governments or things that are going on currently. So you might be right, Philip. That's definitely possible.
Yeah, the Gutless Wonder one was a little disturbing.
Why?
He said that Kilgore Trout wrote it in 1932, and it predicted the widespread use of burning jellied gasoline on human beings.
Yeah, napalm.
Yeah, and it just... describing it that way, and the fact that he was robots would do it because they lack humanity.
And humanity accepted this guy.
We're talking about my story. That's not the Gutless Wonder, though, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so he's just basically retelling it at the
No,
party?
the one at the party's different.
Oh, because it's halitosis. That's right.
Halitosis? The story he tells at the party is about the French chef.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Then how did I remember this from that?
You misremembered. It's no big deal, but
No, he didn't misremember. He got it right.
no, he's not right because this is not at the party. The story he tells at the party has to do with the famous chef.
What's wrong
Well,
with
I'm
my
sorry.
brain?
Your timing was correct.
If you're tired, I mean, that just, whatever. It happens.
I could have sworn that was in this chapter too.
Well, your
It is in this chapter.
It is, but your
The
timing was
robot
correct.
with halitosis.
Yeah. It's right now. It's one of the two stories that he's told.
It's the paper.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so stupid. I thought
the
Phil
Paperboy
was saying
section.
it was in a previous chapter that they did this story.
No.
Okay, I feel better now.
You do?
All right. Well, moving on. So, Billy and Kilgore Trout are now delivering newspapers, and Billy is like lauding all over Trout during this section, and he's like, "Oh, you're so amazing."
He's described as an avid fan.
Trout was just like, "You've heard of me? I didn't think anybody had heard of me. I've never even found any of my books anywhere. Have you even heard of any of my books?"
He's all, well, surely you've gotten letters from fans or something like that. And he's like, yeah, I got this one letter from this real nutbag of a guy. And like, what? And he thinks it's a little kid too.
14-year-old kid.
And because it's like written so horribly, and this guy thinks that Kilgore Trout should be president of the world. And I think it's that, if I'm not mistaken, that Billy Pilgrim realizes like, oh, that's Rosewater.
That was Elliot Rosewater. I know him.
Jeez.
He was a captain in the army, and he's like,
all an adult.
he sounds like a 14-year-old. He writes like a 14-year-old.
And it's funny because like Rosewater had some serious problems with Kilgore Trout's stuff also, like, oh, everything's American, and all this other stuff. And
Do you remember he also said that he couldn't write?
yeah,
He said that
that's
his
right.
writing was atrocious.
so Kilgore can't write and Rosewater can't write.
It takes one to know one, right? Are you guys ready to move on?
Sure.
Pass the letter from Elliot Rosewater.
Oh, this is my favorite part of this whole chapter right here, by the way.
The 18th anniversary wedding party.
Yes.
18th anniversry party.
Yes.
To which a lot of people are invited, including Kilgore Trout.
Yes, and do you know why I'm so excited?
No.
My 18th wedding anniversary is like weeks away.
Boring.
Ah, I'm gonna slap you. Can I like digitally slap you right now?
You can't.
It's been
You
done.
can't.
The timing is perfect. He's having his 18th wedding anniversary. We're reading the book. My 18th wedding anniversary. I feel a connection that I haven't felt before now.
Are you buying your wife a sapphire star ring worth $7,300?
No.
Good boy. Good boy.
Yeah, I don't know what I'm gonna do. Probably nothing because of COVID. Probably nothing because I have kids. Probably nothing because I bought myself a whole bunch of D&D stuff and I haven't told her.
All right, so Kilgore Trout is present at this party. He has gravitated towards this beautiful woman who used to work as an optometrist assistant, but now she is a homemaker for an optometrist. What's her name?
Maggie White.
Maggie White. Maggie White.
The last book she read was Ivanhoe,
I don't like that book.
and she's considered pretty dense.
She's dull.
Or dull. Yeah, that's
Vapid
what it
even.
was. Ivanhoe? I don't know. That's a...
It's a pretty boring book.
Yeah, it's just a strange book for someone that's dull.
Who
I
knows?
mean, is that
It's
Cooper?
a classic. No, it's the Scotsman.
Sir Walter Scott.
Yep.
And by the way, I looked him up and I'm like, I should actually read all those books that he's produced. And it's not that many. Maybe a dozen, maybe 15. And I don't know. He was lauded, so I want to feel educated and sophisticated. So I think
I wouldn't.
it's not worth it.
I didn't think so.
Yeah. When did you read it? When you were young?
No, probably 10, 15. Oh, yeah. I
Yeah.
don't remember.
Yeah.
Long time ago. But at the same time, don't read stuff because you feel like you should. Read stuff because you want to.
I like reading things outside of my normal range of preference. So that
So not D&D books? Good.
yeah, well, this is an example. I never in my life would have read Slaughterhouse 5 if Yul wouldn't have brought it up. And I feel enriched by this. I hate it, but I feel enriched. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding, Yul. I've been pushing
I
your
hate
shots.
feeling enriched. I understand.
No,
I'm the same way.
I'm really, really glad I read this because, like, my old boss kept on saying all of these things from this book. He quoted them, and I had no idea what he was talking about. And, like, I'm picking these things up from this book. If you don't have the frame of reference of reading, then you can't get all of these inside jokes that people mention, probably at your expense.
All right. So the beautiful woman and Kilgore Trout have that long conversation. He tells her a lie about a book that he wrote that is his most famous book about a famous chef that has he dies, and then a bunch of other chefs from around the world come and celebrate his death, and they pour paprika on him before they close up the grave or whatever. I don't remember. It was not a book that he'd actually written. And there's nothing else to that section as far as I am concerned. I'm moving straight on to the part where the Feb begin to sing.
Oh, hold on one second. So, Kilgore Trout said he was afraid of...
Doberman Pinschers.
Yep, that was one of them. He said, like, cats and rats and Doberman Pinschers or something like that.
And also nearby, Billy Pilgrim is listening. He's like watching Kilgore Trout. And at the same time, he's like fumbling in his pocket for that ring that ATN mentioned.
The sapphire ring.
And it's here, I've noticed, because he does it again in this chapter, where he mentions how something costs a certain amount.
$800, he said.
It's $800.
Yeah.
And it's just strange the way he just matter-of-factly always puts that out. The ring was worth $800. What's that in reference to? That's like, you're talking about the ring, you're explaining it, and then the very last thing you say is how much it cost.
I wonder if that's because that's what he thinks about, is the amount of money that it costs, as opposed to like what its emotional value is to the person that he's giving it to or whatever. He kind of handed it to her in a weird way too, but that's, coming up.
Right. Well, that's the narrator also saying how much it costs, not necessarily Billy Pilgrim's thinking how much it cost.
That's true.
So that's another aspect of that.
Yeah. I don't generally like it when people do that in books because it dates the material really badly, because inflation is a guarantee, right? It never goes backwards for very long, if at all. And
where's if you gave a neutral statement, it cost me 2 months' salary.
Or just don't mention how much it costs. Like if you buy your wife a ring for your anniversary, like, okay, it costs money. We all know that. Does she like the ring?
Well,
Great, yay.
That's true, but 2 months' salary scales up without giving a specific number.
Yeah, but who cares?
I don't know though. You can say that ring costs $7,300, or you're going to tell me I'm going to have to spend $800 to get it right now. And it's still a chunk of change, even if we don't consider $800 the same amount as $7,300 these days. You know what I mean? Maybe we can't even understand how much $800 is. It's still something that's significant.
Well, eventually it'll be something Shakespearean. 200-300 years from now, we'll be like, oh, I had to pay 20 quid for that. I'm like, what? Right. I don't even know what that means, but sounds like a lot.
I think they still use quid.
Well, it doesn't really matter. There was a gem here that I'm taking to heart from this book that I really, really found appealing, is when he was talking to Maggie White, and she said, I'm afraid I don't read as much as I ought to. And Trout said, we're all afraid of something. I like that. And then he said, I'm afraid of cancer, rats, and Doberman Pinschers. That is a great response to say, I'm afraid of blah, blah, blah. I'm afraid your flight has been canceled. I'm like, well, we're all afraid of something. I like having quippy responses, and that is a good one, and also a very true one.
And there's one more part to the Maggie White and Kilgore Trout thing that was going on that I was interested in. Is right when she's saying, like, did that story really happen? And he's like, oh, yes, it has to have happened. If I wrote anything untrue, I'd be arrested and all this other stuff.
Yeah. Slander.
When they're describing Maggie as being dull, it also says men looked at her and wanted to fill her up with babies right away. But that didn't happen because she used birth control. And I wonder why, in that space right next to it, it didn't say "so it goes."
Maybe it's because she's using the preventative form and not the kill the baby after you take a pill form.
Well, which they didn't have. But I'm sorry. Kurt Vonnegut said it in such a classy way to say she was extremely attractive and
Really? Want to make a baby with this?
No, there's the sentence before that.
No, it
There's the sentence
said
before
she
that.
was a dull person, but a sensational invitation to make babies.
Yeah.
Which, I'm sorry, that was just a very classy way to say she was sexy.
I think it's a funny way to say it.
I'm sorry, it is a very man way to say
Definitely.
she was attractive
Definitely.
and sexy.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, we're all searching for new words for the same thing.
All right, so at this particular moment at the anniversary party, an optometrist makes a toast to Billy and his lovely wife, whatever her name is.
Valencia.
And then at the appropriate time, this barbershop quartet called the Febs, which stands for Four-Eyed Bastards, they begin to sing That Old Gang of Mine. And there was a word that was used to describe Billy Pilgrim's reaction, because at first he was just hugging on his wife, was being real sweet, but he has a psychosomatic reaction to the song, or it's actually to the singing. It's not to the song itself. It's a strange reaction. It's like he's reliving something.
Well, wait. Is this before or after the plane crash?
What are you talking about?
Well, the Febs sing the song as the plane's
This is
going
obviously
down.
before the plane crash.
Oh, yeah,
right?
that makes sense. Duh. I can't hear Phil laughing at me, but that's probably for the best. I forgot they all die. So my thought was that he's cluing in on the fact that they are going to die in the plane
That's what
crash.
you thought. Okay.
That's my initial thought. We find out later that's not the case necessarily.
Right, sure.
But, I mean, hey, with all the time travel and remembering things and stuff, it could still be an aspect to it.
Yeah, sure. Well, people thought he was having a heart attack.
Right.
Because the look on his face was such that they were concerned for him, and then he kind of like stumbled around and went and sat down. And he soon felt a little bit better, and the party went on, but they sing again. They sing a second time, and the reaction recurs. So he knows it has nothing to do with the specific song. It has something to do with them singing, and we will come back to that in the very near future.
And then when everybody comes over to him and it's like, dude, what's wrong with you and everything, you're like, he's all fumbling, but he's like taking the box out of his pocket, the one with the ring in it.
The ring to give it to his wife.
And he kind of just, like you said, haphazardly hands it over to her. And I guess nobody's actually over there except for Kilgore Trout anymore. And I love this because she's like, what? Is this for me? She's putting on this big old show and nobody's around for it. And then she's like, oh my God. Still nobody around. And then she does it again.
She basically screams to get attention.
Yeah.
And then people start coming back around to look at the ring.
One of the ladies is like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you already got such a big ring from before.
That was the same lady, the beautiful woman.
Oh, was that Maggie White that said that?
Yeah, that was Maggie White. Yeah. Commenting on the diamond ring that she already has that Billy brought back from the war.
Hilarious, though. Very funny moments within that. But I like the fact that she was
grandstanding.
She had to come on. This is my anniversary. I'm getting this ring. Hey, everybody over here. I said everybody over here.
Well, Kilgore Trout notices the reaction that Billy Pilgrim has had, and he's like, "You just saw through a time window, didn't you?"
What?
Yeah, Billy denies it, because I don't think he did, actually. I think he just had a memory. But then he retreats upstairs, and he says Kilgore Trout tried to follow him up the stairs, and he was like, no. No, you can't come up here. So he goes and he locks himself into a dark bathroom.
So, like, his kid's in the bathroom. Okay, this is the infamous future Green Beret. He's 17 at the time, and he's sitting on the toilet in the dark, and he's like, Dad? And the deal is, like, they turn on the light, and his pants are down around his ankle, so I'm assuming he's dropping a deuce. But he has a guitar strapped around his arm. The narrator lets us know he's never going to play that guitar.
He just bought it that day. It's pink. It's
Yeah.
nacreous. And he's never going to learn to play it. Hello, son.
But in the dark.
I know,
But in
that
the
was the other
dark.
thing, yeah.
The door wasn't closed, if I'm not mistaken. Just strange.
Might have been.
He's not strumming it because that would have been a dead giveaway that there was somebody in there. So he's just sitting there on the toilet with his pants around his ankles, holding a pink guitar.
Yeah. He's like, hey, Dad.
The fecophilia portion of the show is over now.
Thank God. So Billy lies down on the bed with the magic fingers going. The dog bolts because it's scared of the magic fingers, I guess. Spot or whatever the dog's name was. I don't remember.
Yep, Spot.
Then he starts to recall the day that Dresden was bombed. He said it sounded like giants' footsteps. The steps were like dynamite banging around up above. And they have retreated once again into the same location where they had retreated earlier, into that meat locker, which is deep underground to take advantage of the natural, cool environment that far down.
Well, essentially a cellar, but a warehouse-sized cellar.
Very large, very secure. They all survived, including their 4 German guards, but they are the only ones. The rest of the guards had just gone home to be with their families and their wives and to proceed to die, so it goes.
Yep, all the girls that he had seen before, taking a shower, everybody.
Dead.
And the other part of, or in their quarters, yeah.
Much shallower basement,
Right.
not enough protection. The German soldiers keep going up periodically, and then they come back down, and they kind of huddle close together, and they whisper to each other about what's going on. Well, he actually describes them a little bit later. He describes them to Montana Wildhack as looking like a barbershop quartet in a silent movie.
Right.
And their faces are ghastly. They're stricken with grief and disbelief and horror and terror. And this is why Billy looked like he was having a heart attack, because he was remembering that day, the bombing of Dresden.
It was specifically the 4 guys reminded him of the barbershop quartet reminded him of the 4 guards. And the
Yes.
4 guards saw how devastating it was up above. Is he remembering the bombing of Dresden or those guards and how they looked?
I think it's an amalgamation, you know?
Sure.
Like Philip said earlier, there are certain things that you remember that drive you back to a memory so clear.
Yeah.
It's that kind of a thing. He saw their faces while they were singing. And mind you, when they were singing that song the second time around, they were doing this weird, like, purposeful dissonance. And now we have these guards who knows what their faces look like actually, but imagine their mouths are open, their eyes are wide, you know, and they could be mistaken for people singing together. You know, all huddled together and right? But that's not what's going on. They're experiencing terror.
Bring back my Coney Island baby.
So he tells this story to Montana Wildhack because suddenly we're back on Tralfamador
They've just coupled. They're not spooning. They're side by side.
because she's 6 months pregnant.
Yes. You can still spoon a woman from behind.
Can you?
I think so. But they are side to side, which is different than how he sleeps with any other person. His wife has asked him, or at least before she was his wife, Valencia, asked him about telling him stories about the war. And he pretty much says they're boring. They're like dreams, and nobody cares about other people's dreams.
Mm-hmm.
But here he is, like an open book, talking to Montana Wildhack.
That's right.
But he doesn't go into a lot of detail. He keeps it, pretty short.
You're right. It's a very straightforward story, but it's not an emotional telling, but he tells her what happened. Like, he describes those guards to her as though they could have been in a silent film as a barbershop quartet, right? So there's detail there, and he's telling her stuff he kept it a secret from himself until now. Like, until he remembers it in the 60s at his 18th wedding anniversary, he was keeping this stuff a secret from himself. And yet he told her recently in the past. It's kind of confusing if you ask me. But we don't stay with Montana Wildhack for very long. We go back to Dresden. It's the next day. It's noon, and they climb out of that meat locker and reach the surface. And he describes it as being like the moon, which we saw earlier when there was ilium having been burned. And he said that the surface is like minerals. It's nothing but minerals.
No organic material remains.
He also says it's treacherous. And those 4 guards and all of those desperate POWs, essentially, start hiking their way out of the city.
So he's describing it as the moon, and he says that they have to go over caverns or something like that.
No, just mounds of like rubble and material. And he said
he describes it. It's like how the buildings have fallen apart, and it's pretty cool.
He did, and he's like, you see those like charred sticks of wood. Those are people.
Were. They get shot at by the Americans who are flying by to see if they've done the proper amount of devastation. The intent, according to the author, was to shorten the war and to ensure that nobody survived. That was the goal.
I was thinking about that, and, if Dresden was such a peaceful place and, it was like the most beautiful city in the world, he says it was to shorten the war. But do you think it is also that this was a place that had to suffer for the sins of the people?
I think it was punitive at this point. I don't think there was a reason to bomb Dresden. Like they said, the war was over. I mean, it was...
Well, it's 4 months.
These guards, the way he describes them in the story is like they're relatively cool people.
Yeah, and the entire city was full of like refugees. And then you have the whole city burns, and then you have these American fighter pilots coming and shooting at anything that moves.
I was also thinking that he often seems like he feels pity for the fellow German soldiers. I mean, they're not soldiers in arms, but they're fellow soldiers in the war.
They're fellow soldiers in suffering.
Yeah, maybe that way. We're all just, cogs in the machine a lot of times. We're not the ones that are deciding what happens in our lives. I think that's another thing about Billy Pilgrim. He's not deciding what to do with his,
100%.
Well, that's what they were saying before, is that, there are very few characters in the war. Most people are they're pawns in a more powerful game, and they have no power to do anything else. And they said they're not characters, they're just...
metaphors.
We're all metaphors.
Well, the 4 guards lead them back to their actual home, the Slaughterhouse 5, but it's been utterly destroyed. So then those same guards turn them around, essentially, and lead them out of town to a part of Dresden that did not burn, right on the outskirts. There's an inn. It says it borders a desert now, but it's open. There's a blind man who is the patron. There is his wife, who is sighted, and his 2 daughters, who are the waitresses and the cleaners, essentially. And it's open for business, and they accept them. They come on in.
They ask, like, have you seen any other people out on the road? And the 4 guards say, there's nobody.
They saw nobody alive.
We came a really hard route, and there ain't nobody.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, how many people do you have? They're like, well, it's like us 4 and 100 Americans.
The proprietor puts the Americans into his barn, essentially. He says they can sleep there. He brings them ersatz coffee and beer and food and lets them bed down there for the night.
Then they say in German, good night, Americans. Sleep well.
That ends the chapter.
Yeah, it does.
I think that was a really cool way to end the chapter, because I just sense that at this point in the war, like, everybody just wants it to be done.
What do you think it means that the proprietor is blind? Do you think that's significant at all?
That is a good point, and that may follow in line with what I'm trying to say, is that the Americans weren't the enemy and the Germans weren't the enemy. The enemy was essentially the Nazi regime. But I think more than that, there was a human connection between people that are suffering, regardless of the side of the war that they're on. And everybody's just tired of it. Brotherhood of
humanity.
Yes, there we go. It's humanity, compassion.
Do you think what he said was significant?
There was no animosity there. There was only compassion and humanism.
What did it make you feel?
Refreshed in a way, and sad.
It made me feel guilty.
Why?
If I identify myself as an American and then I assume that the Americans just bombed Dresden, we just killed, an entire city in a very cruel way. And this guy's like, "Good night, Americans. Sleep well," as if we could, if we were actually part of the war machine.
I don't think it was that kind of pettiness.
Well, he's blind, so maybe that's not what he sees.
Think about the robot with halitosis, man.
You're welcomed in so long as you don't have bad breath. Doesn't matter if you bombed a bunch of people.
Possibly.
It was an interesting way to... Well, he also said it in German, which means that most of them wouldn't have understood what he said.
It's true.
We get it because the narrator told us. So that's the end of the chapter, though. What did you guys think? Did you like the chapter as a whole? Did you feel like that was a... We've been building up to this moment for a really long time, and we finally get the description of the bombing of Dresden. And it wasn't exactly underwhelming, but it was kind of like how he told it to Montana Wildhack. We get some emotional response to the event, but we don't really get the event.
And not only that, the emotional response is so many years later in such a different way.
I think that I'm starting to understand parts of this novel that it took me up until now to do. He experienced something horrifying. He does not want to remember these things.
Mm-hmm.
I think he probably went out of his way to forget these things, to block them out. You remember O'Hare in the beginning? He was like, "I don't really remember anything."
He does. He just doesn't want to talk about it.
He doesn't want to talk about it. He doesn't want to remember these things because they hurt. It's not a pleasant experience that he had.
I felt like this entire section, this monumental point of this entire novel, was completely glossed over, as in, okay, we came out, we walked across some piles of rubble, and then we're out of the city.
And I laughed more in this section than I did in any of the other
That's
ones.
sick.
There's some funny moments. There's the moment where Kilgore Trout is laughing so hard that he spits up an oyster right in
It's a piece of
Mabel
roe.
White's breasts, her cleavage.
Yeah.
What's her name? Mabel? Is that what it was?
And that was Maggie
No.
White. And
Maggie White.
That may or may not have happened to me in real life. Actually, it was a
Well, it's a hilarious moment for everybody else, that's for sure.
Well, do you guys have anything that you would like to talk about, or are we good for this chapter? We've got one more normal length chapter, which is chapter 9, obviously. That's next, and then we're going to follow it up with chapter 10, which is super, super short, and we're going to discuss the book as a whole, just a little bit, and shut it down. Thank you for joining us. Keep reading, everybody. We'll see you in about 9 days.
Good night.
Laters.